I think so much of the talk has been about the quarterbacking. Zach Collaros having been acquired from the Hamilton Tiger Cats during the offseason. That's going to be the focus in training camp and probably right through November. Arielle, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on Zach Collaros and how you think that's going to work out?
Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about how Chris Jones says this is an open competition for the starting quarterback, which I don't think anyone believes for even a second. I mean, this is no offense to Brandon Bridge, who at times during last season handled the offense admirably throughout the season, but you don't bring in a name like Zach Collaros, pay him the money that they're paying Zach Collaros, and then say, yeah, actually, we're not going to start you. He's going to be the starter unless something happens to him in training camp or unless he proves that he's not capable of doing that. But I firmly believe that Zach Collaros, given the system that they translated into in Hamilton, if he were given the opportunity to run that offense as opposed to the abysmal run by Kent Austin at the beginning of the season that he was under, that we would have seen a completely different Zach Collaros. And I think that's a Zach Collaros that we're expecting to see at training camp and will start for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. I've
kind of turned around a little bit on this open competition. Not that I doubt that Zach Collaros is the starting quarterback. There's no doubt in my mind. But I think it's going to fare well if something happens to Zach, that the guys are prepared to step up through training camp, through the so-called open competition. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. It's a bunch of BS that that he's not going to be the starting quarterback. And maybe it's a way of preparing the guys behind him to step up if something happens. But still, Zach Collaros is a starting quarterback. All the signs point to him being the starting quarterback. And I think if he isn't, something's happened in training camp. And it's kind of interesting how the focus is on this quarterback stuff when it really shouldn't be, considering Zach Collaros is what he's done before. He got the 12 games with Hamilton and didn't win a game, but it's always a focus on quarterback. You can't get away from that. And I'm going to be watching Zach Collaros see in training camp how he breaks the huddle, how he interacts with the guys, how he brings up the other quarterbacks if it is an open competition, even though he's got to show leadership and that kind of stuff. So it's another training camp. It's another focus on Rough Riders. What's version number 900 or something like that?
Like Chris Jones pretty much has to say this. Yeah. I mean, it's an easy target for sarcasm, and I've always enjoyed sarcasm. But if he comes out and says, Zach Collaros is a starting quarterback, then I think that undermines the competitive aspect at training camp, not only for the quarterbacks, but for everybody. And if they see that someone's being anointed at one position, I'm not sure that sends the right message. Now, it's a bit of a different situation in Toronto where Mark Trestman has come out and said that Ricky Ray is a starting quarterback. But you were talking about a surefire Hall of Famer as opposed to a quarterback who's trying to recapture his form of 3 years ago. So I think there's different purposes and different methods and different contexts to look at when you examine the Rider situation, how Chris Jones is positioning it.
I just wonder, I don't know. And I feel like sometimes the egos of quarterbacks can be quite fragile. They're kind of like pitchers. They're kind of like goalies. And I don't wonder if just not naming your starter isn't actually the best thing to do for your team, to give that starter the confidence of knowing that their position is secure. I mean, this is something that they're doing in Toronto. Like you said, Mark Trestman said it was disrespectful of Ricky Ray to even suggest otherwise. But you look at some of the quarterbacks that have been in the best in the league over the last couple of years, and they are the quarterbacks that knew they were the starters. And that's Bo Levi Mitchell, that's Mike Riley, that's Matt Nichols, that's Trevor Harris. These are guys that knew they were going to go behind center, and they didn't have to worry about the noise behind them or the people behind them. And even Kevin Glenn last year, I mean, it's not unheard of for Chris Jones to say that this guy is our starter. Even as Kevin Glenn had some struggles last season, Chris Jones maintained the whole time that Kevin Glenn was the starter, and he started every football game except for when he hurt his hand and he wasn't able to. And so I wonder, if Mark Trestman isn't on to something in the sense that maybe your quarterback needs to know and then have that mentality the whole time and not have to look behind them the entire camp.
It sure helped in 2009 with Ken Miller endorsing Darian Durant right out of the gate. That it was great for a young quarterback. Sorry to interrupt, Murr.
And I found that Chris Jones and Zach Collaros really love being asked about who's the starting quarterback. At the mini camp, it was one of my third questions, and people said it was a dumb question. And I'm going, it's not a dumb question. It's been the question going on, and maybe the training camp, mini camp would have been an opportunity to answer that, but it's going to come up again. And I think we're going to probably see when they get down to the first reps on Sunday who goes with the most guys, and whether it's Zach Collaros or Brandon Bridge. A lot of things, Brandon Bridge didn't start. He hasn't been a start. He started one game, but he hasn't been the starting quarterback. And I think he still has to prove that aspect of his game and not coming off the bench when the offensive line has just chased Kevin Glenn all the way from one end of the province to the other. So, or not the offensive line hasn't protected Kevin Glenn. So